Do you realize that it was 6,008 years and several months ago that the very first man, Adam, was created? And according to Bible chronology, that brought to a period, an end of a period of 42,000 years. And the reason why we come to 42,000 years is because each creative day in the Bible chronologically is 7,000 years in length. If you times that times the 6 creative days that are mentioned in the first chapter of Genesis, you come up with 42,000 years. At the end of that period, God had made this a beautiful, perfect home for mankind. It might be nice for us just to go to that first chapter of Genesis, briefly review the time and effort that God put into making this earth paradisaic, making it a permanent home for mankind. In the first chapter, the second verse, it speaks of the earth proving to be formless and waste and dark. Now, how long the earth was in this condition, we don't know. Scientists say the earth was billions of years old, and it's very possible that it's that old. But when God started to make this earth a permanent and beautiful home for mankind, that's when we start counting with day one. Day one is mentioned in verses 3 through 5. That was the creation of light. Now, that's not the creation of the sun, because God made the sun in verse 1. There it speaks of the heavens and the earth being created. But according to scientists, there were great dust clouds around the earth at its inception, at its very beginning. The dust clouds must have been so thick that light couldn't penetrate the earth. And so God took the first day to remove those dust clouds, and thus light could reach now the surface of the earth. Day 2 is mentioned in verses 6 through 8. Here we see the creation of the atmosphere. God had taken the waters and the vapors of waters and condensed them in one huge cloud that surrounded the entire earth. He cooled the earth so that the rest of the waters would now be resting on the earth. And in between the canopy and the waters that are on the earth was an expanse called atmosphere. That's what we breathe today. Day 3 is mentioned in verses 9 through 13. This is the creation of dry land and plant life. That's also a very complex day. After all, in 1 teaspoon of soil, they tell us that there are 5 billion living organisms. That's amazing, isn't it? Day 4 is mentioned in verses 14 through 19. Here we see the thinning of the atmosphere so that light could finally shine to the surface of the earth. The water vapor that God had put above the earth into this huge cloud or canopy was very thick. And again, the outline of the sun and the moon couldn't penetrate, so you could see it from the vantage point of the earth. So God thinned out this water canopy enough so that from the earth's vantage point, you could see the sun and the moon, at least the outline of them. And that would give man light to work by, and of course it gave him the ability to count time. Day 5 is mentioned in verses 20 to 23. Here we have the creation of water creatures and flying creatures. And finally on day 6, verses 24 to 27, we have the creation of land animals, and finally, the crowning creation of man and woman. Tremendous investment of time, wasn't it? Thousands and thousands of years, and we're overwhelmed by the Creator's brilliance to bring about the formation of this earth, the perfect harmony He brought to it. And all of this was not just to create a temporary habitation for man. This was not simply to be a testing ground for him, so that when he would die, he would get his reward somewhere else. This earth was man's reward. This was to be his permanent home. To verify that scripturally, let's turn to Psalm 115. And notice verse 16. As regards the heavens, to Jehovah the heavens belong, but the earth He has given to the sons of men. So this was to be man's permanent and beautiful home. There's something worth noting in the Genesis account of creation. If you go back to that first chapter in Genesis, and you look at the very last expression in verse 5, and the last sentence in verse 8, and verse 13, verse 19, verse 23, and verse 31. Did you notice that all the creative days end with that very last expression? Each creative day says, there came to be evening, and then there came to be morning, a first or second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth creative day. That sounds a little strange to us because most of us think of counting a day as beginning in the morning and ending in the evening. But these creative days, they start in the evening and they end in the morning. Why is that? Well, in the Bible, night and day are oftentimes used symbolically. Sometimes nighttime pictures darkness of the mind, whereas the daylight pictures illumination of the mind. Jesus said the Christians were to be the light of the world. He didn't mean that literally. We even use those expressions in a colloquial way. A person might say, I see the light, and they may not be talking about the light bulb. Or I feel like I'm in the dark, and they may be in a lighted room. Obviously, they have reference to their own understanding of things. Well, if we were to take these expressions figuratively, the question would be now, who was in the dark at the beginning of each creative day and ended up in the light at the end of that day? It couldn't have applied to Jehovah and Jesus Christ because they were the ones doing the creating. They certainly knew what they were doing. And this couldn't apply to man because he wasn't there at the time. If we turn to the book of Job 38, it'll give us the answer to that question. In the book of Job 38, when you look at the context, you find that God is talking to Job out of a windstorm. And in verse 4, he asks Job, where did you happen to be when I founded the earth? Tell me if you do know understanding. And then in verse 7 he says, when the morning stars joyfully cried out together, and all the sons of God began shouting in applause. So now you know who was in the dark at the beginning of each creative day. It was the angels. It obviously was not God's intention to tell them what the purpose of the day was. But as the thousands of years progressed, the day got brighter and brighter. There was evening, but at the end of the creative day, there was morning, fully illuminated, and they could clearly see from the grandstand of heaven exactly what God intended to do on that day and what he had accomplished. And when they had seen it, they were so impressed that they spontaneously shouted in applause. And that indicates to us that there isn't life on other planets. There aren't other humans living on other planet Earths. If the angels had seen this before, I'm sure they would have been appreciative of it, but they're not going to break out spontaneously in applause as if they had never seen it before. This was the first time that God created an earth and man upon it. And it must have been fascinating for the angels to view this and to examine it. It is for us, even when we do it so briefly. But what was the purpose that God had in making earth, placing man upon it? What was his motive in doing so? Well, if we go back to the very first chapter of Genesis, a scripture that I think we're familiar with is in verse 28. And here we find a three-faceted purpose that God had in mind when he made this earth and placed man upon it. Further, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful, become many, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have in subjection the fish of the sea, and the flying creatures of the heavens, and every living creature that is moving upon the earth. Well, maybe you noticed the three-faceted purpose that he had. He was going to have man fill the earth and subdue it, which meant making the rest of the earth a paradise. That was a tremendous amount of work. There are 57.5 million square miles of land surface on the earth. And there must have been more prior to the flood. And every square inch of that was to be made a paradise. Adam and Eve only had a very small acreage. And in addition to all of that, he told them to have in subjection everything that he had made. He said, then you'll have an earth-wide paradise. Then there'll be harmony on the earth. Well, obviously, we don't live in a paradise today. Some people blame God. They don't feel that he really equipped man to carry out the purpose that he was given. But is that true? Or could we say that man was beautifully and marvelously equipped to carry out God's purpose? That's the way David felt, and I wonder if his sentiments aren't our own. If we turn to the book of Psalm 139, Please notice verse 13 and 14. For you yourself produced my kidneys. You kept me screened off in the belly of my mother. I shall laud you, because in a fear-inspiring way I am wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, as my soul is very well aware. When David examined his own body, imperfect as it was, he was impressed with its creation. He said, this is something. It's amazing. Well, God fully equipped man to carry out his purpose, and David recognized that. Why, just to fill the earth, David in verse 13 says, you kept me screened off in the belly of my mother. You know what amazed David? It was the placenta. Couldn't have a baby if you didn't have a placenta. The placenta shields the fetus from the mother. If there was no placenta, the child would never develop. The antibodies of the woman would attack the fetus and abort it. But the placenta shields the child, and uniquely enough, exchanges the nutrients to the child and takes away the waste products. David probably knew far less technically about the placenta than we do, but he knew that the whole process of reproduction was simply amazing. He said, we are wonderfully made. Man was well equipped to fill the earth. You notice in verse 13 that he makes a comment about his kidneys. Do you ever thank God for your kidneys? We may not even think about them. But your kidneys sweep clean about 2,000 pounds of your blood every single day. That's amazing, isn't it? Kidney is not a very big organ, about the size of your fist. And that kidney has within it 200 million filtering units to cleanse the blood. If you were to stretch them, they'd stretch for 90 miles, all within one little tiny compact organ. The kidneys not only sweep clean the blood, but they maintain mineral balance, is essential for our survival. Maybe when we go home tonight, we'll thank God for our kidneys. The skin is called the third kidney. It's the largest organ of the body. And they call it the third kidney because it also excretes toxins, gets rid of waste products. When you sweat urea. And that serves two functions. Obviously, it gets rid of toxins, but it also acts to keep the body cool when we're hot. Of course, it keeps us warm in the winter. What would we do without our skin? What would we look like without skin? I think it would be kind of gross. If you had a piece of saran wrap around you, we'd probably get used to it, but you couldn't call it attractive. And the skin is self-repairing, keeps us from getting waterlogged. It's attractive. What an amazing organ. Our bone structure is something that amazes architectural engineers because our bones, they say, are 8 times stronger than reinforced concrete. Reinforced concrete is not only concrete, but it has steel bars going through it to reinforce that concrete. It's very strong. They use it in the construction of many buildings. But the bones don't weigh nearly as much as reinforced concrete. If you did, a 160-pound person would weigh about 800 pounds. You'd probably think twice about going swimming. But because the bones are so light, why, we have no problem getting around on the earth. The gravity seems to be just perfect for us. Our liver is a veritable chemical laboratory. It has more than 500 functions. Could you name one of them? It produces over 1,000 enzymes. Could you name one? Well, it's a good thing it knows what it's doing. It's a good thing God instinctively told it what to do. The heart, what an amazing pump. 4,370 gallons of blood every single day through 60,000 miles of veins, arteries, and capillaries just to keep your 100 trillion cells alive. We hardly even think about our heart unless it begins to hurt us. Even the nervous system, as you study it, you can't help but be impressed. It would amaze a computer technician. The nervous system is a communication network that receives and acts on over 100 million impulses every single second. You can't even say 100 million in a second. Our eye has amazed evolutionists. What an organ. Think of what you have in the recesses of your skull. That's a motion picture camera, non-blurring, self-focusing, 3D, all in color. Even the hand is an amazing piece of equipment that God gave. When you think about it, it was the main tool that he gave to men to make the Ark of Paradise. He didn't give them a Craftsman tool set, didn't give them a John Deere tractor, didn't give them a derrick, he gave them a hand. They say it's the most perfect tool ever created. They say there's nothing to duplicate it. And it's amazing because the hand has such flexibility. Even we're amazed at what people can do with their hands, whether it be in art or music or in construction. And yet, if you are holding on to something for life, it can become as rigid as steel. The hand, this principal equipment, was wisely made though. All the muscles of the hand are placed, not in the hand, but in the forearm. If it was placed in the hand, the more you used your hand, the more muscle-bound your hand would become. You'd have one big fat paw. It's a good thing that God put the muscles of the hand in the forearm that wouldn't interfere with the flexibility or dexterity of it. So like David said, we're beautifully made, wonderfully made. Man was fully equipped to carry out this purpose that God had given to him. But what have been the results of man's efforts? Have they really tried to fulfill this Genesis 1:28 mandate? Well, we know that Adam left God. He took a course independent from God, and since then man has gone downhill. His record in taking care of himself, this earth, and the animals on it the whole record is terrible. The pollution of our air, our water, our food sources, it's frightening. 1 out of 3 people will get cancer in this country. And they say that much of it is because of the carcinogens that are placed in our food and water. And what can you do about it? What can you do about it? If you're on the job, the chances are that 10% of the workforce in this country, and perhaps 10% of the people sitting in this room, are exposed to cancer-causing substances on the job. They say there's over 100,000 chemical pesticides produced every single year. And even in a state like Pennsylvania or the northern part of Maryland, there are such tremendous problems with pollution. The scare in Gettysburg with the pollutants that ruined about 300 wells, and the pollutions that we don't even know about. Some of the pesticides that are used on the crops around here are absolutely fatal. They're known poisons. They cause cancer. Sometimes a pesticide is taken off the market because it's a known carcinogen. DDT is an example of that. And maybe we're happy that the government offers at least some protection so that we're not totally poisoned by things. But the problem is DDT, for example, is sold in other parts of the world. It's used extensively on the coffee crops in South America. Juan Valdez never told you that, did he? Air pollution adds a lot of stress to our life. I guess anybody that works near D.C. can surely appreciate that. 80% more deaths due to high blood pressure where the pollution levels are high. When we look at man's record as far as taking care of the animals of the earth, his record is just as miserable. What did they say about 1,000 animals on the endangered species list? And for the most ludicrous of reasons, take the silverback gorilla, slaughtered just for its hands. They use them for ashtrays. The rhinoceros is also on the endangered species list. Nobody eats rhinoceros meat. Nobody wears a rhinoceros coat. Why is he extinct? Well, they want his horn. They say it's an aphrodisiac. Goes for $14,000 a pound on the black market. What a waste. The horn of the rhino in your fingernail is made of the same material, keratin. The passenger pigeon is really a sad story. Most of us are not old enough to remember what they look like because we weren't even around then. The passenger pigeon numbered 6 billion in 1885. And in 1914, the last one died in the Ohio Zoo. Her name was Martha. She was a pet, but she didn't breed. That was the end of the species. Think about that. When you add that up, that means that man had to kill, on an average, of 566,000 passenger pigeons every single day for 29 years straight to finally wipe out the species. Man's cruelty in the name of sport to animals is also calling to Jehovah, bear baiting, bullfighting, cockfighting, dog fighting, fox hunting. This is supposed to be entertainment. Even the use of animals in the name of science has come into serious question. Vivisection, which is experimentation on animals, is simply terrible now. I mean, it seems reasonable to use animal life to save human life, but that's no license for valueless, unrestricted experimentation. Monkeys and rabbits are still forced to smoke until they die of lung cancer. Electric shocks are given to animals until they lie helpless and die. Rabbits are still used for the Drey's test, which is a makeup test. If you use finger polish remover, any kind of cologne, any kind of cosmetic, it's put directly into the eye of a rabbit. If the eye ulcerates or bleeds, they use the other eye. Once the rabbit's blind, then they kill it. Well, the reason why scientists are so upset with that is because there's so many other ways of testing makeup without causing needless suffering to a little rabbit. The rhesus monkeys are constantly used in medical experimentation. They're starved, they're forced to run on treadmills, they're subjected to radiation. Their average time when they hit a laboratory is 37 hours. Cats and dogs are continually abused in medical experimentation, and that's why they tell you not to leave your pets in the car, because they're constantly looking for animals to use. They don't want the ones from the street because they're not cared for. They want the ones that are well cared for. What do they do with these animals? Well, here's an example. They'll blind cats, castrate them, they cut the nerves in their sex organs, they destroy their sense of smell, and then they test them as to sexual response. Does that make sense to you? When animals are brought into a laboratory, their vocal cords are cut so they can't scream. 64 million animals are killed annually in medical experiments. We talk about what man has done to the earth, what he's done to animals, but look what he's done to himself. We look at endangered species, we can't eliminate man. In Africa, 1/3 of the people there face food shortage. But besides food shortage, you have 150,000 people dying every day just because they don't have clean water. What a waste of human life. And of course, it's not just the physical problems he faces, but in the more advanced countries, there's a tremendous moral decay that men are suffering. Venereal disease is on the increase, abortions, 55 million each year. Divorce, delinquency, crimes, rapings. They say 1 out of every 6 women will be raped in this country. Please be careful. And we see that child abuse has now come to light, and it's not a new problem, it's only surfaced as new to us. One talk show was interviewing a researcher on this who last year reported 150,000 cases of gonorrhea of the throat in children under 10. 1 out of every 3 girls will be sexually molested by somebody she knows before she leaves home. 1 out of every 8 boys. Isn't that terrible? Now, of course, man has done amazing things in the time that we're living in. We can't take away from his construction efforts, medicine, transportation, energy conversion. They're impressive. You can't help but be impressed with man's technology, but it backfires on him. The more he creates, the more destructive he becomes. In Harper's Magazine, in the editorial, it said, technology is great for everybody who can afford it. And for those who can't afford it, in the third of the world that's going hungry, it's useless to them. The beginning of technology is found right in the Bible. Did you know that? If you turn to the book of Genesis, I think you'll find this interesting. In the chapter 11, we come to read about the story of Nimrod. Nimrod was a man who was in opposition to God. For example, God wanted people to spread out over all the earth. Nimrod wasn't really interested in that. He wanted to keep everybody together in one location. So he had the construction of a ziggurat tower that would reach to the heavens, almost to defy God's law of gravity. Nimrod was a smart man. See, he knew that if he kept the smartest people with him, he'd be able to accumulate the intellect and the knowledge from each of these men, and then use that accumulated knowledge to advance his civilization. That's why we are so more technologically advanced than the Egyptians were or Babylonians. It's not that we're smarter, because their math and languages are more complex than ours. It's because we've accumulated knowledge over thousands of years. And once the right amount of knowledge was finally accumulated, why men went from walking on Earth to walking in outer space. It was an incredible leap within 100 years. Well, notice Jehovah's observation of Nimrod and his people down in verse 6 of chapter 11. It says, after that, Jehovah said, look, they are one people and there is one language for them all. And this is what they start to do. Why now, there is nothing that they may have in mind to do that will be unattainable for them. That was an interesting comment, wasn't it? Come now, let us go down there, confuse their language, that they may not listen to one another's language. God said there would be nothing unattainable for them. The Yigbook made an interesting comment about that verse. It said that if God did not confuse the language, it's very possible that man at the rate he was going would have entered the space age even before Christ came. Well, God could not permit that because it was out of sync with his purpose. The Messiah must come, and thousands of years must be left to remain to choose the heirs to a government that would finally restore the earth to paradise. Well, when God confused the language, he set mankind's technology back 2,000 years. And those 2,000 years obviously allowed the outworking of God's purpose. Now we're living in the last days, just when man's technology is on the brink of destroying him. Most of us here feel that God is the only one that really has the ability to stop man's downward slide into self-destruction. And maybe we're wondering, what should we do in the meantime? If it's really in the hands of God, do we just sit and wait? Or maybe we should really work hard at fulfilling the Genesis 1:28 mandate. Well, up until the time of Christ, the mandate given back in Genesis was the main purpose of people living on the earth at that time. Anyone that feared God had kids, they try to raise them right, and they try to make whatever part of the earth they were living in a paradise. But when Christ came, he preempted the Genesis 1:28 mandate. He said that he had another purpose that he wanted to center our lives on. What is that? Well, in verse 19 and 20. Jesus said, "Go therefore, and make disciples of people of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things I have commanded you. And look, I am with you all the days until the conclusion of the system of things." Well, the message is clear, isn't it? Christ wanted us to be deeply involved and deeply committed to the preaching of the good news of the kingdom, because it was that kingdom government that was going to restore harmony back to the earth. He obviously wanted as many people to know about this. Who was he going to count on to spread that word? Well, he was going to count on those disciples that he had talked to, and he was hoping that they would make disciples, and in turn they would make disciples themselves. That is our main purpose in being here. It's basically to teach the good news to as many people as are willing to learn it. Are we having a full share in that work? Does it appear to God, and even to others, that that really is our main purpose in life? Well, it's not easy to do that work. It's certainly not natural. We talked about that earlier on Thursday night, but it seemed like Jehovah recognized that we have the ability to rationalize. All of us do. And in the book of Ephesians chapter 5, Paul gives us some straightforward counsel just to perhaps readjust our thinking and get the real purpose for our existence in perfect focus. Ephesians chapter 5, and please notice verse 15 and 16. Paul says, keep strict watch that how you walk is not as unwise, but as wise persons. Now, what would indicate a wise person? It's nice if someone feels you're wise, but what indicates it to God? It says he will buy out the opportune time for himself because the days are wicked. People feel, well, when we're in the new system, it'll be easy to worship Jehovah. We'll have time. But when the days are wicked, our time becomes more limited because there is the necessity of dealing with the pressures of wickedness. They can be very distracting. And as a result of being distracted, we can kind of lose our focus off that main line of work that he'd like us to be involved in. The Apostle Paul says, buy out the time, which indicates that we're not going to have it. It means we're going to have to sacrifice it from something else. Notice his conclusion in verse 17. He says, on this account, cease becoming unreasonable. Go on perceiving what the will of Jehovah is. So what does it look like for us? Does it appear to God that that is the main purpose of our existence? You see, if the prime focus of our lives today is our home, our families, our lawns, our animals, then our timing is out of sync with God's timing. That was his purpose. And it will be his purpose in the future. But right now, he wants us deeply committed to this work. And I think we can see the logic behind it. That's what's going to restore Earth to a beautiful paradise. We want to be part of it. Naturally, God wants others to be part of it too. I think most of us are happy that God is going to take a direct hand in affairs. Really, if he did not clean up this rotten mess on Earth, there would be no hope. We've talked to people about the word Armageddon for months now in our ministry. That's God's spring cleaning of the earth, and he's going to get into every nook and cranny until everything is spotless. What needs to be replaced is going to be replaced. What needs to be destroyed will be destroyed. And thankfully, those who participate in God's purpose, they will be preserved to enjoy life on a paradise earth. The Bible says that on that paradise earth is going to be a tremendous resurrection. As a matter of fact, in Acts 24:15, it says that he'll bring back both the righteous and unrighteous. If you've heard that for the first time, it could be a little scary because the person says you bring back unrighteous people, then what kind of paradise are we going to have? Well, obviously, if unrighteous people are going to be brought back, they're going to need to be re-educated. And there is a massive educational program in store for this earth and for those who will be resurrected back to it that we have not even imagined. In the book of Isaiah chapter 11, I thought this was an impressive way of illustrating this educational program. Isaiah 11:9 says, they will not do any harm or cause any ruin in all my holy mountain, because the earth will certainly be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah, as the waters cover the very seas. Well, it almost sounds redundant to say the waters cover the seas. Obviously, the waters saturate what we call the sea. Well, the knowledge of God is going to saturate people of this earth as the waters saturate the seas. So we have a tremendous amount of work to do. Really, if you look at it, we'll never have a physical paradise unless we have a spiritual paradise first. That's what Isaiah 11:9 is telling us. Maybe you're wondering, how many people does this involve? Well, statisticians tell us that about 20 billion people have lived and died since the time of Adam. 20 billion people. Sounds like a lot to me, probably to you too. There's about 4 billion people on the earth now. We're having a nice time trying to get through them. When we think about 20 billion more, how could that be done? Well, the 8th book gave an interesting way of analyzing it. It suggested the figure 1 million for those surviving. That didn't mean that they were hoping 1 million would survive. We hoped a lot more will, but we'll just work with the number 1 million just because it's easier for us to use in this illustration. So let's say 1 million people survived God's great spring cleaning of the earth. Let's say God gave them 100 years to make their part of the earth that they were living on a paradise. Now let's say after that 100 years God started the resurrection and brought back 3% of the total population of people living on the earth. Now that means each person brought back would have 33 teachers. I guess you'd learn something if you had 33 people instructing you. And let's say you had those 33 teachers for 1 year. The next year, God could bring back another 3%. Each succeeding year, just bringing back 3% of the total population of people living on the earth. In 400 years, you would have brought back, resurrected, educated 20 billion people. It would have been done. If you add the 100 years to that 400, that gives you 500 years, and that leaves 500 years left to Christ's millennial reign. 500 years for all those resurrected, educated residents of the earth to now make up their mind whether they want to work in complete harmony with God's purpose or not. We're not saying it's going to take place just that way, but you could see that it would not be an impossible task. It could be done orderly and be accomplished. Of course, at the same time that we're involved in that educational program, we're going to have the wonderful opportunity to make this earth a paradise. What gratifying work that's going to be. In the book of Isaiah, it paints a beautiful word picture, Isaiah chapter 65. I think many of us have read it so often because it helps us to visualize what life can really be like. In verse 21 and 22, it speaks of people having their own homes and having their own vineyards. But you know what's impressive? Is the last phrase in verse 22. It says, the work of their own hands my chosen ones will use to the full. You know, that's indicating a very satisfying work. You know, most people don't like what they do for work. A lot of people downright hate their jobs. They get little satisfaction from it. Or they can't stand the company that they're working for, can't stand the people they're working with. Sometimes you like a job, but very few people like it enough that after they retire, they like to mingle down there. Most people won't show up there. When they retire, they hope never to see that place again. Obviously, our work is not that satisfying. We do it for a living. Well, in the new system, that won't be the case. We will love what we're doing. We will love every minute of our work. And we'll see lasting results from it. We will come home, we will feel tired, but we'll sleep like a rock. The night will pass like minutes, and we will be chomping at the bit to get back out there and work to make this earth a paradise again. In verse 4, it tells us something about our spiritual paradise. It says it will actually occur that before they call out, I myself shall answer. And while they are yet speaking, I myself shall hear. That's wonderful, isn't it? We don't have that kind of relationship with Jehovah now. We don't call out and he answers, or he calls out even before we talk to him. Now, Adam and Eve had that. God spoke to them the breezy part of every day. But Isaiah is telling us that we're going to have a relationship with Jehovah that we haven't even tasted. What a time to be alive. With the full rehabilitation of earth and man to God's original purpose by the end of Christ's 1,000-year reign, God's seventh day, his rest day, will then be complete. And do you know who's been watching? It's those millions of angels. Can you imagine how dark the seventh day must have looked to them? Why, God's purpose was disrupted. It was the first time that anything ever went wrong in the entire universe, and this is for countless billions of years. It was the first time God was ever questioned. And that day, the seventh day, was dark at its beginning. But as these thousands of years have elapsed into this seventh day, God's purpose has become more understandable to the angels. They've been able to see the outworking of his purpose. And by the end of Christ's 1,000-year reign, that day will come to complete illumination. Those angels will once again be looking down, and they will be saying, there was evening, but now there is morning, a seventh day. And they will once again break out spontaneously into us. And we can add without the slightest note of fantasy that mankind will live happily ever after.